We've covered a lot. We've done a lot of things and we've dug into this VBA. One area that we've skirted around really though is where to store the code. Currently, all the code is stored in the same file that you are working in. So if we take our change case procedure as an example, when we go into the Visual Basic, we'll see there are different objects. There's each of the sheets. So there's a code sheet for every sheet. There's a code sheet for the book. And we've seen that we can put sheet and book triggers in each of these. There are form objects if you've created any user forms, and there are modules. And the modules contain your procedures or functions that you might create to use within your VBA. All of those objects are still stored within the VBA project for the change case procedure file. So they're all stored in that Excel file. You delete that Excel file, you delete all the VBA code. Also, to use that VBA code, that Excel file must be open. Now sometimes there are blocks of code that you want to reuse over and over again in different workbooks. Effectively, you would like that code to be sat there the whole time, ready and raring to go. So the procedures are waiting, the functions are waiting. Now that will be particularly useful for any of the procedures that you trigger from ribbon buttons because they've been built for Excel. So if there are any bits of code that you think, I built these for Excel, I want them to be available in Excel at all times, then really they shouldn't be stored in individual workbooks, but in what Excel refers to as the personal workbook, which has a name of personal.xlsb. Now you don't need to use the personal workbook, you can create your own, but what you need to do is make sure that that file is physically available every time Excel opens. So it has to be placed in the Excel start folder. So let's explore where we get this personal file from, and then if we want to create our own, where we need to store it so that Excel already has it open, ready to use. So everything we've done so far has been in the current file you've been working in. If we want to store things in the personal workbook, then the first thing that needs to happen is that personal workbook needs to exist. It does not exist in your Excel application until you create your first macro. So in Excel, if we go to record a macro, if you can remember doing it this old-fashioned way rather than writing the code, you'll remember that you get a choice of the personal macro workbook, a new workbook, or this workbook. All the VBA procedures we've created so far have always been in effectively this workbook, but here we have a choice of going into the personal macro workbook. Now, if we were to run this record macro and create a macro, it would actually create the personal macro workbook because it doesn't yet exist. So that's one method of creating the personal macro workbook, is to actually just record a macro that effectively does nothing because we can throw away the code afterwards, but in doing so, it creates the personal book. Alternatively, we can create our own file, which can just be a straightforward Excel file. So file new. And it doesn't have to have any special features apart from A, where it's stored, and B, its extension, because you'll see that when Excel creates it, it has an extension of XLSB. So we go to File, Save As, and in the Save As type, you can see that XLSB is an Excel binary workbook. The next thing is to tell it where to save it. Now in your whole file system, if it doesn't go in the Excel startup folder, it won't start every time Excel starts, therefore it won't be there and available. So our first step is to find out where the Excel start folder is. Now you could look through your operating system, or we can ask the Visual Basic editor to tell us. So in the immediate window, if we go down to application dot startup path and run that, we then get told where the startup folder is. So that's got to be a lot quicker than trawling through. I mean, there is a pattern, but depending on the operating system you're currently running, the Excel start folder could be in a slightly different place. If you're using roaming profiles, it goes in a different place. So it's just a matter of finding the right path for the machine you're on. So on this machine, that is the path of the Excel start folder. So I can copy that path, go back to Excel, do a Save As, paste the path up to here. See, now it's going to go to the right path, and make sure it's a binary file, and then just give it a sensible name. My code, that would be fairly sensible. Paste the path in, give it a sensible name, give it an XLB extension, and save. I now have a file for storing my coding. Now what I want though is for this file, although it's in the startup folder, for it not to actually be visible. So I go to View and Hide. And then the file is not visible to anybody using Excel, including myself, so I can't accidentally use the file, which has happened in the past. But every time I want to add some new code to it, manually, I need to unhide, in this case my code book. Then I go into the Visual Basic, and here I have my VBA project for the My Code book. And it's in there that I would add all my code. Now if you want to use the Excel default name, we just simply record a macro. We can call it macro 1, tell it to go in the personal macro workbook. Okay, it's not actually going to do anything, so stop. We're just using the record macro process to trigger the creation of the personal macro workbook. What you'll then find when you go to View and Unhide is you now have personal.xlsb, which is this file. Looks exactly the same as the one we created, mycode.xlsb. So there isn't a problem with you using your own file, or the one called personal. It's where you store it that matters, and it needs to be in that startup folder, which we got the path for using the editor. !application.startup path. So this is creating a separate file to hold your code, not all your code, but some of your code that is only pertinent to using on your machine. Now you know where the file is, and you can even give the file your own name. You can save that file and back up that file, and even share that file with other people if they want the same procedures that you've built, particularly if you've built quite a lot of procedures and quite a lot of your own functions. Just remember that if you email an Excel file to somebody and it's trying to use some of the capabilities of the VBA that you have in your personal book, your My Code book, that will not be available to the file that you've emailed. Only any code built into that particular file is held in that particular book. So there are advantages and disadvantages to separating the code into a separate file. And it's just a matter of being aware of the function you're creating at that stage, whether it needs to be in your personal book so it stays on your machine and is available to the whole of Excel, or whether it's personal to that particular file, therefore stays with the file and goes with the file if it ever gets emailed anywhere. So this is creating your own storage location for some VBA. Our next step is to look at how we place our code into the personal book.